joining us in today's webinar. My name is Sandra from Abu Dhabi Securities Exchange. Today we are hosting Mr. Marcus, Managing Director and Senior Partner from Boston Consulting Group, and Mr. Mustafa, Managing Director and Partner from Boston Consulting Group, who will address how COVID-19 has tremendously affected the financial industry and the stock markets worldwide. I would also like to introduce Mr. Henry Bergstrom, our Head of Business Development Department, who will run quickly through some of the measures ADX has put in place in response to the COVID-19. And also he will be mentioning some of the initiatives ADX is pursuing to make ourselves more resilient and more attractive and more accessible to investors. Please, if you have any questions while panelists or speakers are presenting, you are free to write them in the below Q&A box, and Mr. Henry will leave time at the end of the session for them. Now, I would like to introduce, I'm honored to introduce His Excellency Khalifa Al-Mansouri, Chief Executive of Abu Dhabi Securities Exchange, to give a keynote speech. Your Excellency, please.
Thank you, Sandra. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to our first investor pulse check entitled Understanding the Impact of COVID-19 on the Investors Universe. This series is intended to bring the voice of the investors to the business leaders and the board members. Today, we'll feature the investors' perspectives. As it has always been, ADX places an importance on its digital platforms and to enhance the customer experience, as well as its communication infrastructure, enhancing the breadth and the depth and the reach of its offering. Our first investor pulse check will highlight how ADX is working to respond to the disruptive circumstances in a proactive communication manner. It will also highlight the resilience of our infrastructure. Since the beginning of the pandemic, ADX have worked swiftly and proactively to support its stakeholder and to activate our business continuity systems. We did this on the objective in mind is to have every one of our stakeholders connected to the business, including the investors and listed companies. The ADX digital approach will boost our e-services capabilities and will highlight the agility and preparedness to deal with any disruption. To build the sustainable post-pandemic investment environment and to contribute and deliver to, despite the challenging time we live in. We remain committed to catalyze the long-term sustainable business strategies and operational excellence among listed companies, and we continue our focus on developing a potent digital platform, a remote working environment that allows securities to be traded and benefit all of our stakeholders. This is highlighted in our digital platform Sahmi, which has seen during the pandemic high level of utilization and usage. I would like to thank the team members and the panelists participating in this session from ADX and from our partners at Boston Consulting Group. Thank you again, and wish you a wonderful webinar. Thanks.
So, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I'm heading the business development in ADX, and I will convey the message of ADX initiatives during the year and for the coming years as well. So ADX becomes 20 years. The anniversary takes place later in the year. And we have done a significant effort, obviously, not only this year, but going forward and the past years, and done significant things to enhance the opportunities of Abu Dhabi market, Abu Dhabi Securities Exchange. To just give a few highlights, we have done corporatization of ADX. We have a new owner, Abu Dhabi Development Holding. We are looking at the organization structure to meet the international needs and to be compliant on those. We have a significant government, Abu Dhabi government support into our capital market development. And as His Excellency just mentioned, we are investing significantly to the digital transformation to improve the customer journey of our clients, to introduce new technologies, to introduce new offerings to investors, to brokers, to the listed companies. And we are in process of implementing the strategy that was concluded roughly a year ago. One of the things we have done together with the listed companies is to enhance the opportunities of foreign investors to tap into the interesting companies listed at ADX. 4 companies just recently have opened up their foreign ownership limits to further investments. So now there is 6.3 billion dirhams investment opportunities for grabs to those investors. Foreign, whoever they are totally welcome to Abu Dhabi Securities Exchange. And as you can see, now majority of the listed companies have taken this into consideration. 80% of the companies have significant amount of foreign ownership allowance. And in the screen, you can also see that our main investors come from UK, USA, and surprisingly Luxembourg. ADX, as one of the leading exchanges in the region, has taken seriously the global environmental issues, social issues, as well as governance issues. And we did create a reporting guideline to our listed companies a year ago. And our listed companies are working on improving the sustainability and the ESG metrics to meet the sustainable goals mentioned by the UN. Now, ADX, as an example to the other companies, our clients, has also introduced ESG report. And this is rather significant step for us. It contains all the 3 layers: sustainability, social, and governance. It follows the UAE vision of 2021 and the Abu Dhabi economic vision of 2030. So ADX has been in the forefront supporting our customers, our listed companies, and also allowing investors to have access into sustainable stocks. And we are currently increasing the appetite of the listed companies and working, for example, with FTSE, our index partner, to introduce an ESG index in the turn of the year. Now, obviously, what happened last year is not really the impact or it is not impacted by COVID. However, the cash dividend proceeds of this year in the very difficult economical and financial situation of the companies have showed the resilience of the ADX market by increasing the dividend payout during the year in the dividend period. So as you can see, 11% increase of the payout happened and the yields are rather attractive. As we discussed about the digital transformation, that's very high on ADX strategy initiatives. We are investing a significant amount of our resources into moving into more digitalized world. Of course, COVID is an example where the digitalization of office work, digitalization of creating businesses is also something that ADX is pushing forward. So for example, Sami, which is our integrated digital platform for our clients, contains, for example, the access for the investors to be part of the e-voting, be part of the general meetings of listed companies. So through a digital transformation and the platform that we have created, the investors can participate into the voting of the general meeting services. Also, we have introduced Payit, which is a digital wallet that can be used for multiple purposes to repatriate dividends or participate into, for example, subscription of listed companies, etc. In addition to what I just said, through Sami, investors can be accessed to the investor number. One of the statistics I dug up just for the purpose, I saw that ADX have seen significant number of new investors entering into ADX. The number may not seem high, but we are talking about 1,700 new investors, and that's quite a big number for a 1 month period or 3 weeks period. Most of them were actually retail investors. So it shows that the interest to Abu Dhabi, to interest to ADX and our listed companies, even during the time of pandemic, has increased. And that is a showcase of the resilience of our market and the attractiveness to our listed companies. And as a happy to announce type of award, we got the Best Trading Innovation Excellence Reward from GCC. And CFI was the organizers of this, and this is very valued reward that the Capital Finance International offers to the best performance in the market. And then final thought, I'll leave it with you. We have now introduced a Sharia compliant exchange traded fund that is offered by Chimera Investment, and it tracks S&P Sharia compliant products in the UAE. So that's a significant effort again that we have done during the pandemic time, working together with various parties that are involved in introducing an ETF. So I see this as a very good showcase of the market interest. This will be followed with other listings. We have a number of companies in the roadmap. We are working with family businesses and also issuers of the debt market to support our companies' ability to serve the investors is also high in the agenda. So we are talking with various partners to see how we can expand the equity research and to support the IR function of the listed companies. So all this put into a place in these very tough few months are aiming to increase both the activeness of the market, the attractiveness of the market, and to be able to serve our customers in possibly another crisis period. Inshallah, we don't see them, but should they come, we are prepared. So having said that, I will now move it over to our partner BCG and hand them over the floor to discuss the COVID impact into the capital market here in the region, as well as outside the region. Thank you. And let me just remind you that please send questions using the Q&A tab on the bottom of the screen. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mustafa Boska. I lead our capital markets business in the region. Today, we will be sharing with you the outcome of a regular pulse check that we do with investors. This has been going on over the past several months since the beginning of the pandemic. We do this fortnightly. The respondents to the survey are investment firms that have collectively more than $4 trillion of assets under management. They cover a broad spectrum of investing types and styles, including income, growth, quantitative, technical, etc. The survey focuses on two key topics. One is the expectations for the U.S. economy and the stock market, as well as the shape of the recovery. And then the second one is the investors' perspectives on critical moves that executives and board of directors are considering and making. And the first one is, of course, very much related to the shape of the recovery worldwide. And the second one is, of course, applicable around the world, and especially for the companies in the region. So we're going to be sharing this as an aggregated view. It's not segmented by investor type, but we see a quite a nice, like convergence in terms of expectations. So what do we see in our latest pulse check? In terms of the duration of the COVID-19 impact, the investors are expecting that the economic impact of the crisis to extend until end of second quarter of 2021. And 64% of the investors are thinking that the S&P 500 will return to earnings growth by end of Q2 2021. So it is, of course, very much correlated. One thing that is shaping up lately is that the investors are thinking that the shape of the recovery will be more of a W shape. 31% are thinking that way, and only 11% is thinking that it will be a V-shaped recovery. And this has been changing rapidly over the past couple of months. And I think a big number here in terms of the fiscal stimulus that the economists, the investors think the economy will need in the US is more than $4 trillion US dollars. When we come to the stock market, I think we see a little bit more divergence in the views. So 49% of the investors surveyed are bearish on the stock market for the rest of the 2020, and 35% are neutral. And what we also see is that 35% of the investors are bullish for the market in 2021, and a big majority, 57%, is bullish for 2022. What has been also changing over the past couple of months is the expected low point for the stock market and the expected market level in 3 years down the road for S&P 500. So investors, as per our latest survey, think that the low point for S&P 500 will be 2,765 to be reached by Q4 2022. And this is an average across of all participants, of course. And then in 3 years' time, they are expecting that the level that will be reached is going to be about 3,700. One interesting thing which is to note here is that this low and high point has been, changing very rapidly as we see, of course, the stock market performance around the world and how, like the broader investor universe has seen. If there are any questions on that, of course, we can discuss later. So without any further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Marcus Massi, who leads the financial institutions practice of BCG in the region, to discuss the broader implications for the companies around the world and in the region.
Good. No, thank you very much, Mustafa. Now let's double click on a couple of topics which we are asking the investors regular basis. The first one was a question of how do investors think about financial resilience and liquidity? Obviously, all the investors understand that, I would say, preserving the soundness of the balance sheet and the P&L is of utmost importance. So therefore, 72% are actually looking at preserving liquidity in order to make sure that you have got a continued basis. At the same time, also, they are encouraging or are open in order to strengthen the balance sheet, either through issuing debt or issuing equity on an ongoing basis. So everybody understood that preserving and securing the balance sheet is of utmost importance. Dividend, which is quite important also in the Middle East, but also internationally, everybody understands that there has to be a certain dividend maintained. Although the message is clear that as the crisis goes on, it will be much more difficult to actually maintain a similar level or pay dividends at all, and therefore 36% of the global investors think that to maintaining a dividend share is actually equally important as securing the liquidity. Interesting enough, there's also some investors who want to see the management actively managing their investorship and working, for example, on repurchase agreements of stocks and therefore securing a certain level of the stock price going forward. So 44% actually think about securing a lower valuation through an active sale purchase program. Now you have to keep in mind that when you look at the current investment levels or current stock market levels, the S&P today or in June is only down 5% and almost at pre-COVID levels. In China, for example, it's almost at the same level as before. So, before we get to levels where you actually have a lower valuation in order to use opportunities, it might actually take some time. And that's where Mustafa came in and said a market correction and a downturn at the end of the year might actually open some of these opportunities. Now moving to this page in terms of financial guidance. As you know, companies have always struggled to actually provide financial guidance. And in the last years, there has been more and more efforts to more or less go to an annual outlook and provide, I would say, some strategic guidance on the general path. The majority of the investors understand that providing guidance during these uncertain times is very difficult. And therefore, the majority also thinks that pushing a guidance for 1 or 2 quarters is actually appropriate, and contrary, than probably to some practices in the past, will be accepted by the investors. But at the same time, it is still important to provide the guidance in Q3, as investors want to have an outlook and an understanding where the company is heading, and what are the actions and what is the outlook, the financial outlook, as the crisis continues. I think it's very important, as in line with what also Henry said, is to have a very active investor relations with an active communications towards your shareholders. Could actually be a good tool for most of the companies to work with in order to keep the interest in their own shares, but also increase the interest, not only for existing investors, but also new investors. And as you've seen, your ADX is working on actually increasing the investorship going forward. Now, going to the next page. Again, it's a two-edged sword, which the investors are saying. On the one hand, they want to ring fence the business. On the left-hand side, you see that there's a strong majority of 91% of the investors who more or less say they expect from the management to strengthen the business and to build capabilities for the long term in order to have a defendable business model. Only 40% of the investors think that margins and profitability is important in order to pay out dividends or income. But the majority thinks that the management is well advised in order to think about the future. On the right-hand side, there's also a clear expectation that the management doesn't stop short of just securing the existing business, but looking for opportunities. So 69% think about actively acquisition should be pursued, or 67% think that a portfolio review should be done in order to understand which part of the business or business lines are not value adding for the future and therefore could potentially be divested. And the last one, if you now sum it up, and that is probably on the next page, I would say appeal to the issuers and the companies on the market is there's a strong expectation of international investors, especially international investors, to shape up the game going forward. There's a dissatisfaction with the management overall, as 80% are on the edge, either somehow okay or somehow not okay, because they do not see decisive actions of the management. They're satisfied on a couple of points, especially on the immediate response, securing the business, building digital capabilities or a digital platform as an immediate response to the COVID crisis, or reviewing the supply chain in order to see how you reduce the dependency on, for example, China. Where they are not satisfied is visibly pushing the key topics for the medium and long term and not waiting until the crisis unfolds. And secondly, a lack of strategic vision and strategic actions in order to position the company in a stronger way going forward. If you look at the past crisis, all the companies who have strongly invested in their own capabilities or invested in buying market shares have significantly gained, above proportional compared to some other companies once the crisis was over, because they could actually act from a basis of strengths. And last but not least, to round up our discussion, what are the next key priorities? First is reopening is on everybody's mind. And while everybody understands that there's a business to run, there's also an expectation that it should be cautioned and it should be done in line with good practices, especially health and safety of the employees. Secondly, to shield the company of some potential activism risks, which is probably less prominent and a risk here in the Middle East, but especially internationally, as and we call it the predator and prey game. A lot of companies actually, when we talk to them globally, especially in the times of April and May, saw company valuations, which made it very attractive for investors to come in. And the indecisiveness of management makes it even more easy for an activist investor to move in and require change. And then last, Henry already alluded on the ESG agenda for Abu Dhabi and ADX overall. In the last 12 months, and especially during the COVID crisis, we see an acceleration of the ESG agenda overall. There will be, going forward, a significant push of international investors to look for ESG adequate stocks to invest in, as the internal investment guidelines will increasingly prevent them from investing into stocks or bonds which are not ESG compliant. And in addition, we are also working with a couple of governments at the moment who are following through on the ESG agenda as they want to tap into alternative investor pools on a global basis. So with that one, I'm handing it over to Henry Beck for potential questions.
Thank you, Mustafa and Marcus. So I have a few questions already. Thank you for those. I'm encouraging you to push forward also further questions that you might have. Let me start with a question to Mustafa and Marcus. What is the change in the investor sentiment over time? Let's say sentiment from the beginning of the year. How has it changed during the pandemic, and what is the sentiment currently in terms of investments? Just to give you a highlight, there seems to be, and I think that's typical to emerging markets, there is a strong interest from the local investors and regional investors. Maybe outside the region, there has been some outflow of capital, but the balance has been rather positive in overall.
Yeah.
Thank you, Henry.
Maybe I take the general one. Maybe over time, so since the beginning one, I would take the global view and then elaborate a little bit on the local one is, I think since the COVID crisis has started in, let's say, March, in its full extent, February, March, if you would have looked at the survey back in March, it would have been a very grim picture. Now, you would have seen that, the initial shortfall in February actually shocked most of the investors. But then as the stock market actually recovered and some of the early signs of recovery showed up, you saw that the investors jumped from very pessimistic to very optimistic. And actually in March, when we did the same survey, you had a majority of investors who believed in a V-shaped recovery. So meaning a quick rebound driven by the sentiment of the stock market, as well as a back to normal in Q3 or Q4 of 2020. Now, as the crisis has unfolded in April and May, I think the picture became much more clearer. And what we saw over the last two editions, which we've done, is that the recovery looks much more like a U-shaped one. So everybody expecting is that it carries into 2021. And in the last version, actually, we also saw that the Q1 2021 expectation has actually been pushed out from end of 2020 to 2021. And there's a good likelihood that this will actually continue a little bit as the summer will be a little bit slower and the recovery probably will be pushed out as we go. There are also some, I would say, worries that it is a W-shaped one, which means you see an up market and then a down market. So investors are embracing for and protecting their portfolios in order to make sure that they're not caught off guard in a down market. And that's the second theme, which is using opportunities and looking for alpha. Now, as the volatility obviously increases the opportunity to create some alpha on a trading basis. But there are also some pockets where investors are looking for more resilient markets. And that's where some of the emerging markets can come in quite nicely. When you look at the Asian markets, for example, they've been extremely resilient over the entire time of the COVID crisis. So there's some interest of international investors to say, we are watching quite carefully also the performance of certain stock markets and how far they are providing certain stability to our overall portfolios. And obviously the Middle East, despite the low oil price, has been fared in that respect okayish. Mustafa, anything to add from your side?
No, thanks, Marcus. I think one interesting trend is the views of the investors about the economy and the stock market didn't go in the same direction. So on one hand, at the beginning, people were expecting more of a V-shaped and fast recovery. And over time, we see that is turning more into a W-shape, and where the recovery is going to be happening later. But on the other hand, as you said, what we see from the investors is that they're becoming more optimistic about the bottom that will be reached in terms of the stock market. So I think that was this two different trends, which sometimes doesn't reflect actually the economic reality. But I guess in that this famous of course discussions around whether markets are moving more towards behavioral type of sentiments versus like fundamentals. So I think it will be an interesting thing to watch as we see we are coming out of the recovery, on how the economic implications will affect the stock market.
Thank you, gentlemen. There's a question actually I would like to put on our CE, Mr. Khalifa. What barriers to investments in the UAE and specifically Abu Dhabi are cited as or by international investors? So what kind of barriers do you think we need to start working on and removing? And I know at least that some of those we definitely has been working recently quite a lot. But if you just give your opinion on this.
Two key barriers, I think, cited by international investors. One of them is the foreign ownership. The other one is the free float. And I might add the third one, which is related to liquidity. And we are in ADX, we are tackling the three major or key barriers highlighted by the investors. We are encouraging listed companies to increase the foreign ownership. We are also encouraging the listed companies and the shareholders to increase the free float. And we are also, and this is, there was an initiative called the Market Maker 3 months ago, and we hope to activate it in the coming months to increase the liquidity and the of the market. So we are tackling the three key areas. And as you mentioned earlier, Henry, in your presentation, now 80% of our listed companies are accessible by foreign investors. And we will see, hopefully in the coming months, the more free float in the market and more liquidity coming to the market. Those are, to sum up, the key barriers mentioned by investors, and we need to communicate more those key messages and the initiatives we're doing to reach a wider audience of investors.
Thank you very much. I think there's quite an interesting question I would put to the gentleman from BCG. Following the global market pandemic impact, do you think that investors, international or local, behavior will be driving them to more other types of asset classes, maybe not liquid, but at least other types of asset classes, whether it be gold, commodities. We have seen that the crypto market is booming to all-time high, as well as the gold. So how do you see that the pandemic will impact either just short-term or long-term to the investor community?
Yeah, so maybe a quick thought on that one. The interesting thing is that different than 2008 and 9, where you could invest in any asset class and all asset classes had the same correlation downwards. In this crisis, actually, you saw a disparate picture, right? So the stock market has fared fairly okay. The oil price has plummeted. The gold price has surged overall. The interest rates have fluctuated in between. So it's a little bit of a different picture than what we've seen in 2008 and 9. When we talk to some of the investors, and I talk to the ones who are in the Middle East, I think there's most of the investors have private businesses, and they also are investing their private money. And the difference is what we see is in their private businesses, they're extremely cautious. They try to increase liquidity as much as possible, reduce the capex, and try to ring fence the business in order to make sure that they stop, any outflow of money, and more or less, sit and wait for the future to see how to actually further respond or take, corrective actions. On their personal side, actually, most of them, at least the ones we talk to, are looking for opportunities. They see that they're not interested in secured and safe investments primarily, maybe as a part of their portfolio. But every time when we talk to them, they ask us, I'm sitting on a cash pile of whatever, 50 million, 100 million, and I'm looking for some investment opportunities. So at least from the ones which we have seen, it's a difference between private corporates, very safe and sound, versus investments where you're going a little bit more aggressively into the market.
Maybe I can add on that a little bit of a global perspective, and how that will be affected, especially gold and commodities. So recently you've seen everybody is seeing a significant increase in the gold prices. As you've seen, the expectations for the fiscal stimulus is very, very high. And I think the governments are definitely injecting a lot of money to make sure that the recovery is happening fast. But of course, this brings a big question into the picture, which is around, will this amount of stimulus going to create inflation? Yeah, so I think that expectation in terms of, like recovering the economy without creating inflation versus, yes, recovery, but then inflation comes up, is probably the dynamic that needs to be watched worldwide to see whether there will be further push into gold and commodities, I would say.
Thank you, gentlemen. Maybe another question to His Excellency Khalifa, discussing about the UAE economy. So how do you see the recovery, and when and where does the recovery come from? Because the UAE economic situation obviously have a great impact to the primary market, to the activities of investors, and to the offering of the exchange, and how ADX is prepared for that recovery. Everybody knows about the oil pricing currently, and then there's a forecast that it may not in the near term significantly increase. I'm sure this has an impact to the recovery, but in general, what, how, and when UAE economy would be improved situation?
Well, part of the answer was mentioned in the presentation by BCG, where they see the recovery happening sometime in 2021. But I think the UAE is in a better position to accelerate the recovery. We've seen that from the rapid response and the what we call the policies put forward from the federal government with the stimulus package, the central bank initiative, and the Abu Dhabi government, what we call stimulus and policies with regard to responding to the pandemic. Recently, I think the reopening the economy and economic activities will help accelerate the recovery process. The opening of travel, I think, will add to the also to the effort. But I will stay in line with the projected trajectory of economic recovery mentioned by BCG. But I'm a little bit optimistic by, I think, the first quarter of 2021. Hopefully we'll see the economy, I would say, recovering to the levels of the pre-COVID-19 levels. I think we've seen much of the shock observed, and the cautious measures, and people are taking them seriously, and we can see the numbers of cases decreasing, and hopefully being an optimist, we will see the exchange as a mirror of the economy, reflecting the recovery of the economy. I cannot comment on the oil prices because oil prices have been historically a volatile commodity. But I think once the economy, the global economy, starts the recovery track, we will see oil prices coming to the normal levels of 2019 and early 2020.
Thank you. We have just a few questions left that I have received, so please continue pushing them forward. One is related to the trading activity, the liquidity. So ADX, as probably all exchanges in the world, saw significant improvement of the trades, number of trades, which is always the case when the volatility comes in and there's uncertainties. And it has sort of started to create a curve, ups and downs, depending on the news, depending on where we are with the pandemic situation. How do you foresee that the liquidity would either stabilize or start creating so-called normal curve in terms of trading volumes and trading value in the next, let's say, 6 months to 1 year? And this is for our guys in BCG. Mustafa, Marcus, please.
Sure. Maybe a first one is, as you already said, from a liquidity point of view, volatility and uncertainty creates a pool of liquidity, and therefore you see a lot of trades actually happening, as we've seen in all the crises before. I would expect, as you can see also from the investor sentiment, that this volatility and therefore the liquidity will resume to a similar levels, or for the next 6 months. So to a certain extent for investors, it's a quite interesting one that you actually have a lot of movement and liquidity in the market going forward. Traditionally, when you look at the markets in the Middle East, it has been, I would say, a time of low liquidity because there was a set of institutional investors holding on to certain shares. You had a certain international investors who bought into the market and then held their stocks for a certain period of time. And then, as His Excellency mentioned, there's a lower free float. I think what will be a little bit of a game changer going forward is what His Excellency indicated, which actually hopefully will keep the level of liquidity on a higher level, is the increase of foreign ownership limits, the increase or working on the free float, as well as, potentially, as you said, there are a couple of companies already in the pipeline to list even during these times. So to increase the market cap and number of quality assets to invest in going forward. So I think as Abu Dhabi is focusing on these three main issues, if that is properly and timely implemented, and we are very confident on that, then I think the brokers as well as the investors should enjoy actually a significantly increased pool of liquidity.
Thank you very much. I think currently we are out of the questions. So I don't know if Sandra, you would like to wrap up, or maybe we wait for just a few seconds if anybody would like to send the sort of the last question.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Henry. Thank you. I think we're just going to wait a little bit for people to give some time for more people to ask questions.
Maybe in the meanwhile, again, actually, maybe a quick recap of all the three great panelists here, His Excellency Khalifa, Marcus, and Mustafa. Can you please give the audience maybe three different things that would be success factors for ADX in the turn from the pandemic into the new normal? What do we need to do in order to stabilize the market but increase the attractiveness of the market at the same time? Maybe we can start with you, Khalifa.
I think, Henry, you've answered that in your presentation, but I would like to reinforce it. What have we learned from the pandemic? And this is maybe a human thing, is how we overcome obstacles and catastrophes and crises, and we recover and we learn, and we try to do our best in sustaining the development. I would focus on sustainability. Any initiative we do, we have to have sustainability in mind, whether it's investing in digital transformation, and this is one of the things, the disruptive technologies of the future. I think we've learned that many of our products and services can reach a large scale of investors, customers, and clients using technology, using cutting edge infrastructure. So we will continue in ADX into this front, and we will continue our regional lead in bringing the most innovative solution and infrastructure. The other thing you mentioned is the sentiment, and the sentiment is related to some of the key areas we're investing in, like the governance, transparency, sustainability, and this is how responsible exchanges and listed companies can be in front of their clients and shareholders. The last thing is all of this is built around people, and I think having the right human capital is important. So the health and safety of our human capital is at the center of all of those initiatives. and we will continue in keeping our staff and people healthy, safe, well-trained, and developed, and being open to suggestions, comments, and recommendations from our stakeholders, from many of our partners. Those are the key three main things I think are the key success driving factors in the near future.
Thank you very much. Marcus, please.
Yeah. So maybe taking a little bit more, I mean, we already mentioned, some things which you mentioned on, implementing some of the initiatives regarding liquidity in order to drive the attractiveness of the market going forward. But let me also double down on the topic of transparency in investor communication and investor education, because as you've seen from the investor survey, there's a clear, I would say, level of sophistication and understanding on expectation what the investors actually want to see from the issuers and market participants. And the Middle East and the GCC has been, I would say, probably on the more nascent stage when it comes to interacting with the different shareholders and stakeholders on the market, in order to be very transparent on what is the current status of the economy. And if you see some of the incidents which happened, it is impacting the entire market. So therefore, there's a vital interest of the entire market to have an active communication and proper governance plus investor relations plus investor education established, so that you can reduce part of the volatility through an informed investor base who get the right information and who know how to react to certain information and how to build the investment strategy going forward. And then one additional point is, and I think one of the questions was alluding on it, on commodities and gold and so on. At the moment, we've got a very equity-heavy stock exchange. As you mentioned, Henry, in the Excellency, there are initiatives going on in order to expand the breadth and depth of the market. And that's probably also something where investors would actually value it in terms of getting access to additional forms of asset classes, so that they can have a much more balanced local or domestic portfolio versus a very equity-heavy one.
Any comments further from Mustafa, please?
Maybe I can add one other topic. You already mentioned in your presentation, Henry, that ADX is already progressing on the ESG standards. As BCG, we see that a significant amount of money is being diverted into investments that are compliant by ESG standards. And in that respect, I think it is important for the companies to really have proper sustainability strategy, and also make sure that they are compliant with these ESG standards, because the future is going to be more and more money will be diverted into such companies and such investments.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. There's one more question which I can quickly cover myself. Will ADX introduce derivatives? The short answer is yes, definitely. The longer answer is that the derivatives market requires one part of the market infrastructure that we are currently working on, which is the CCP, to manage the risks and to mitigate possible default situations. So whenever the CCP would be launched, then we have the opportunity for the derivatives market. But that's definitely on the pipeline of ADX strategic and market infrastructure initiatives. And similar to other markets, many things are related to awareness. So we need to educate together with market participants and the regulator what derivatives are, how do they behave, what kind of risks do you need to understand as an investor to invest into derivatives. And then we need, of course, tradable instruments. And of course, the easiest one is the index related future. And as I told earlier, let me just repeat that because it's important part of ADX strategic initiatives. We have partnered with FTSE to co-brand and co-deliver, co-serve the market when it comes to indices. So Abu Dhabi all share index and the industry related sector-based indices will be transformed into FTSE ADX index. In the autumn, we will also introduce benchmark tradable index, as well as Sharia index to support the investment banks and asset managers to introduce their various instruments tracking whether our indices, or we can even deliver a custom index for them to offer those markets to the investor community. And then, as I said, also the ESG index is there to be introduced early 2021. So I think from the questions perspective, we are pretty much done.
Did you answer us the Sukuk question?
Sorry, I did miss that. No, but since you opened up your box, maybe you want to have a response to that question.
Sukuk bonds are listed. The ones listed in ADX are available for trading on different outlets, banks. So those are OTC instruments, and we can redirect you to the OTC dealers around in Abu Dhabi. This is in a short answer.
Thank you very much. All right. So I think we can conclude here. I, of course, thank you very much, the audience. Thanks for participating. Thanks for being active, for your questions. Some of you asked whether we are going to share the presentation. Yes, we can do that. I hope we have all the necessary details of the participants to do so. We discussed about ADX strategies, ADX future activities and projects we are focusing on, which are all related to market development, related to introducing new services, new asset classes, working on companies to be listed. We foresee enhancement of the listing activity. And as we discussed, foreign ownership limits are one of the focus areas, as well as the free float. And then we heard very interesting information of the COVID market studies, which has multiple angles to it. There's a sentiment of investors that are looking for maybe calm down of the market. However, there are opportunities that you can tap already today. Some of them are more riskier than the others. There are interesting companies that are performing throughout the pandemic. There are opportunities for consolidation and acquisitions. And there are opportunities to introduce new types of offering as an investment tool to the market participants of all kinds. So with this quick summary, I would like to thank, of course, the panelists. Thank you, Your Excellency, It was good to have this, and I'm sure this will be something that ADX continue to offer our clients and interested parties going forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Mustafa. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Sandra. One last thing is if we can send out a survey for the participants on how frequent can we do the investor pulse check, and if they find it useful, and if they have any other ideas, who can we bring from the market participants to be the next panelist. And I think this is a good platform to start with, and we can expand it and use it as a communication platform. Thanks all, and wishing you to stay healthy and safe, and I'll see you next time, inshallah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you. So just before we end this webinar, we will be sharing a survey to the participants. Please help us enhance our services, as His Excellency mentioned. And I would like to thank all of the panelists. Henry, thank you very much. Mr. Marcus, Mr. Mustafa, thank you very much for the valuable information you have provided us. Stay tuned for more webinars, inshallah, by ADX. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.